Praise Church, y'all may be seated. Good morning, good morning. Okay, just look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, we really got to start that petition for Chase. And if you're here watching or online and you have no idea what's happening right now, just stay with me, but hear me out. My last 6 sermons, I have gotten the most obscure and ridiculous passages. Go check it out. Not right now. Stay with me right now. But sometime go back and look at my last 9 sermons. And to this day, there has still been no petition that has been started for me. But today, finally, I believe, like the prophet Sam Cooke once sang, that a change is going to come. And John 3:16 is in my future. I can feel it. I can feel it. Beloved, in today's gospel, we find Jesus in a very similar situation to that in which we find Jesus today. In this passage, we find Jesus caught. We find Jesus caught between religious and political leadership who earlier in the passage were offended and threatened by Jesus' prophetic witness and wisdom. You see, y'all, Jesus had started preaching as Jesus was prone to do. And when Jesus started preaching, some things had started landing, and some things started landing a little too close to home. And Jesus began to tell one of his patented parables as only Jesus could do. And the religious and political leadership that was gathered there began to lean in, and they pulled out their popcorn and they said, oh, this is a good movie. This ain't like one of them Tubi movies. This is a really good movie. Anybody ever seen a Tubi movie? They're really bad. And they pulled out their popcorn and they poured some extra butter over the top of their popcorn. And they said, this is a good movie. The only problem was halfway through the movie, they began to realize that the whole movie was actually about them. And not only was the whole movie actually about them, but they were not the heroes of the movie. You see, the words, the very life of Jesus had become a threat to their authority. And so now we find them in this passage trying to get Jesus up out of the way. Oh, y'all, but they can't do it in a way that's too obvious because Jesus is too popular. You see, Jesus had a blue check on Twitter back when it meant something. He gets retweeted a lot, and his TikTok is blowing up, and an entire crowd has gathered just to hear him speak and to see him heal and to see him be who only he can be. And so they decide that if they can't go after Jesus directly, then they'll settle for the next best thing. And they decide to go after Jesus's authority. And they decide to go after Jesus's authority by trying to make Jesus look incompetent. And so they set up a little thought experiment for Jesus, Sister Brunel. They set up a little trap for Jesus, and they devised a trap, and y'all, it's a really good trap. It's almost a foolproof trap. They asked Jesus a seemingly absurd question about a woman who had 7 husbands, all brothers, who all end up dying. And not for dramatic effect or to set up a Lifetime movie, but as a reference to the law given by Moses. That if a man died without children, according to the law, it was his brother's responsibility to carry on the family name. Y'all, this is in Leviticus chapter 25. Another example as to why, if you ever hear someone talking about biblical marriage, chances are they haven't encountered all the biblical possibilities of what that could really mean, but I digress. I'm just saying, it's a lot of stuff up in there. So apparently this happened 7 times. And now here they come. And they ask Jesus, they say, Jesus, Jesus. See, in my mind, I pictured them doing this. Say, Jesus, Jesus. You believe in this resurrection, don't you? You believe in this little resurrection? In the resurrection, whose wife is she really? Oh, beloved, it's an absurd question on a couple of levels, which we'll get to. But the absurdity of the question matches in their minds the absurdity of this thing called the resurrection. You see, beloved, they think the very idea of the resurrection itself is absurd. They think the idea that after people die, they come back from the dead is unthinkable. They think that the idea that after death has spoken, there is still more to be said, even if that more is coming from the very mouth of God, is unconscionable. They think that the possibility that the ultimate ending could ultimately lead to a brand new beginning is just bananas. And so they set up a trap for Jesus. And the trap is to get Jesus to pick a husband for this woman. I know some of us are like, that's the trap? Jesus, please pick my husband and do it quickly. It's rough. It's rough out in these streets. Some of us have been unhinged by Hinge. Don't raise your hand, just blink if it's you. Prayer in the chapel, in the baptistry during communion. But in the story, the trap is to try to get Jesus to pick a husband for this woman. Because of course, regardless of which husband Jesus picks, he'll have picked the wrong one. Because someone in this story will end up committing adultery because, after all, she was married to all 7. So no matter whose wife she becomes, there's a dilemma. And then if Jesus can't pick a husband for her, since it will in theory be adultery, he'll have to admit that after all, the resurrection is an untenable and ridiculous idea, and we should all go home and watch Love is Blind on Netflix. Oh, but you gotta love Jesus. Oh, you gotta love Jesus. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, you gotta love Jesus. Oh, find another neighbor because that neighbor did not believe you, and say, neighbor, you gotta love Jesus. Because in one sentence, Jesus exposes what's actually going on. And it has nothing to do with marriage. And it has everything to do with a lack of imagination and a lack of belief in the power and the story of God. Jesus essentially tells them that the problem here is not about who gets to be married to who. Oh, come on in here, somebody. Don't ever let somebody tell you that the real problem that we have in this nation is who is allowed to be married to who. I'm just saying. Jesus essentially exposes their focus on marriage as a red herring and says the real issue is that you're trying to hold on to your power, but in trying to hold on to your power, you have underestimated and misunderstood the power of your God. The question on marriage was a smokescreen. You see, they were asking Jesus a question that actually wasn't based on the resurrection into new life, but they were asking Jesus a question that was actually based on the resuscitation of the old life. Oh, I'm gonna say that one more time. I wrote this at 1 a.m. So there might be some stuff don't make a lot of sense. They were asking Jesus a question that actually wasn't based on the resurrection into new life, but they were asking Jesus a question that was actually based on the resuscitation of the old life. You see, they had limited God, and they had believed that the best God could do, even though they really didn't believe it, they assumed that the best God could do was to resuscitate the status quo. But All Saints Church, I came here this morning to tell you that the resurrection isn't about resuscitating the status quo, but it's about reimagining a whole new world in which even the status quo itself has to bow down as a whole new way of life emerges. That's some good news this morning. The resurrection isn't about resuscitating the status quo, but the resurrection is about the status quo itself, bowing down as a whole new way of life and orienting ourselves in the world emerges. Y'all not getting it? Let me help you. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like the difference between, going to the gym and you working up a sweat, kind of like I'm doing right now. And then imagine you coming from the gym after working up a sweat, and then you just go straight to dinner with some friends, but instead of taking a shower, you just spray on some cologne. Don't raise your hands if you've ever done it. That's a knowing laugh right there. Imagine just spraying on some cologne. You see, the Sadducees, for all of their brilliance, they thought the resurrection was about spraying on some cologne on top of some old funk. But Jesus reminds them and reminds us that the good news is that God is not in the business of spraying cologne on top of some old funk, but the resurrection power of God means that there's a whole shower coming soon, a shower of hope, a shower of peace, a shower of joy, a shower of grace, a shower of renewal, liberation, and justice. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, there's a shower in your future. You see, the good news is that Jesus reveals that the imagination of God is even bigger than our imagination can fathom. Oh, come on, y'all, that's good news. God's imagination is actually bigger. God's imagination is actually better. God's imagination is actually kinder, not smaller than ours. I don't know about you, but I need me a God like that. I don't know about you, but I need me a God whose imagination, whose wisdom, whose grace, whose love is bigger than mine. He says, look, y'all don't even understand. Y'all over here tripping, but y'all don't even understand that there's a whole new world coming and that is already here with so much peace and so much love that not even the best marriage will be able to contain and grasp it, that not even the best marriage will be able to encapsulate its joy. If you're married, don't shout too loud on that. Trying to help you out. Somebody getting elbowed right now. Jesus says, there's a whole new world coming. So don't ask me about whose wife she will be. Because there's a world coming, and that is now already here, where you'll understand that your whole premise is off. Because the world that you're in and the world that your God operates in is assuming that a woman is property to begin with, to be passed down. But there's a world coming, and that is now already here, in which you'll get the revelation that women are not the property of patriarchy, but women are full image bearers of the divine. Jesus says, imagine a world where the woman in this story says, I don't want to marry none of y'all. I'm on this new app called Hinge. You gotta love the Bible. You gotta love Jesus. So you see what Jesus is doing? Jesus is getting us to wrestle with this question. The question is, where are the places where we are settling for and where we are expecting a resuscitation of the status quo, but Jesus is offering resurrection and new life? Where are the places where we are expecting a resuscitation of the status quo while Jesus is offering resurrection and new life? In this country, what are the systems and institutions that even the most well-meaning people are trying to resuscitate instead of believing in resurrection and new life? Oh, let me make it plain, beloved. Let me make it plain. I'm afraid that we keep trying in this country to resuscitate. I'm going to just use one system. We keep trying to resuscitate the system of policing. We keep trying to reform policing. But what if Jesus is offering resurrection and new life and is asking us to imagine and advocate for and build a world where we all have the resources that we need, and because of that, we live in a world where the police aren't needed in the first place? Oh, I didn't get as many claps on that one, Sister Crystal. It's okay. It's tight, but it's right. Because if you study history, beloved, police are not a part of the ontological fabric of society. But the system of policing was created to manage inequity and, in this country, as a physical line of defense for white supremacy. But imagine a world where there was so much justice and equity and resources that we didn't need police to manage the fallout from all of the inequity and injustice. So, beloved, I'm not just trying to abolish the police, but I'm trying to abolish the world in which we need the police. Imagine that world. You see, beloved, that's the difference between resuscitation and resurrection. And I know, beloved, personally, if you're anything like me, you might be a hot mess on a good day these days. But I know we all have those places personally, tucked away deep within us, that if we're honest, we think that the best that God can do, if God can do anything at all, is to resuscitate the old thing and not bring resurrection power and life and do a completely new thing. We all have those places in our own personal lives. I hope this makes sense. I wrote this part at 3 a.m. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, is this making sense? Thank you. When we get to the 4 a.m. part, we'll see. And as I get ready to close, I mentioned at the beginning that we find Jesus in this passage in a similar situation that we find him in today. Beloved, don't we find Jesus caught today? Don't we find Jesus caught between religious and political leaders who are offended and threatened by the prophetic witness and power of Jesus, who seek to silence Jesus and get him up out of the way? But because of his popularity, they know they can't dismiss him outright, so they seek to trap and co-opt his message and his entire existence. Beloved, I came here this morning to tell you that unfortunately, there are still people in the business of trapping Jesus for the purpose of getting him out of the way in order to preserve their own standing and power. But All Saints Church, y'all know I wouldn't come here this morning without some good news. The good news today, beloved, is that the same Jesus who would not be trapped back then is the same Jesus who will not be trapped right now. And the good news today is that if anyone is having any trouble differentiating the real Jesus from the Jesus in whose name so much harm is being done, you just got to look for the Jesus who ain't trapped. The good news is, church, that our hope, especially in days like these, is not found in a Jesus who is trapped in patriarchy, but in the Jesus who is liberated and seeks to liberate all people from gender-based violence and oppression. The good news, church, is that our hope, especially on a day like today, is not found in the Jesus of white Christian nationalism who is trapped in anti-black racism, anti-immigrant legislation, and xenophobia, but our hope is in the brown Jesus who lived the black experience and who himself was considered an outsider. Our church, the good news is that our hope today is not found in the Jesus who is trapped in homophobia and transphobia, but our hope is in the Jesus whose greatest commandment was love and who never condemned anyone over whom they could not help but love, especially when that person was their very selves. The good news is that Jesus still refuses to be trapped by the systems and the powers of this world. Oh, beloved, when you get to the free Jesus, you can be sure you've gotten to the real Jesus. Oh, I'm going to say that one more time. That was the 5 a.m. part. When you get to the free Jesus, you can rest assured that you've gotten to the real Jesus. And y'all know, I wanted to end on a good note, on a happy note, on an encouraging note, but I'm feeling led by the Spirit of God to end on a prophetic note, to end on a note of curiosity. And I want to ask us collectively as a church community, where are the places right here at All Saints Church where, if we are honest, in spite of our confession, desire, and intention to walk with the revolutionary Jesus, Jesus remains trapped? Right here at All Saints Church. Where are we not walking with the free Jesus who frees people? Y'all, we just had a forum a few moments ago on the psychological impact of all white iconography to people of color. Beloved, right here at All Saints, are there any places where Jesus might be trapped in all white iconography? I'm gonna sip my water while we think about that. And I know nobody here did it. Nobody here shaped the glass, stained it, and put it in its place. But as Isabel Wilkerson said, this is not the problem we've created, and it's still our responsibility to fix it. It's not enough to sing songs and preach sermons about justice while injustice preaches and sings to us before anyone has ever said a word. Oh, I'm going to say that one more time. That was the 5:30 a.m. version. I said it is not enough to sing songs and preach sermons about justice while injustice preaches and sings to us before anyone has ever said a word. So that's the end of the sermon. And that's where I want to leave us. Where are the places personally, as a nation, and right here at All Saints Church, that if we're honest, we're settling and expecting for resuscitation. I don't know what recitation is. Is that a word? Where we're settling for resuscitation while Jesus is offering resurrection. Amen. Amen.